I never expected my own sister to betray me like this, but here I am, writing a story I still can't believe happened. Growing up, Kaylee always had a way of getting what she wanted. She was younger by 3 years, but she acted like the center of the universe. Mom and Dad worked hard to put food on the table, never letting us feel how tight money was. Still, Kaylee never learned to share or compromise, and she knew how to tug at people's heartstrings to get her way. Mom was our rock, the kind of person who would give up her last dime if we needed it. She'd work overtime, come home exhausted, yet never miss a chance to ask how our day was. She was also the reason I learned to be patient and empathize with others. She taught me that families should stick together, even in the worst storms of life. When Mom fell ill, I was in college, balancing classes and a part-time job to contribute to the household. Kaylee was in high school and insisted she needed the latest phone or trendy clothes to fit in. Mom would sit her down, explaining why we had to be cautious with money now. Kaylee would nod, tears in her eyes, promise to be more understanding, then throw a tantrum the moment Mom wasn't looking. It always fell to me to calm the waters, patch the holes, and pretend everything was fine. Mom's passing hit me like a freight train. She had ovarian cancer, and although she fought fiercely, the disease spread faster than any of us could cope with. By the end, it wasn't just her life that was gone. Dad was utterly changed, slipping into depression. He started shutting us out, burying himself in old photo albums, staring blankly at the walls. It was like our family had lost not just one member, but two. As for me, I had to put on a brave face. Bills had to be paid, groceries had to be bought, and Kaylee still demanded attention. I carried the weight of everyone's grief, certain that if I cracked, the whole house of cards would collapse. During the funeral, Kaylee almost seemed bored, distracted by her phone notifications. It angered me, but I kept telling myself she was still a teenager, still processing her own pain. And maybe that was partially true. Our mother was lying in a coffin a few feet away, though, and Kaylee barely looked up. There was something else Mom left behind besides the pain. She had a jewelry box passed down from her mother, who got it from her grandmother. It contained a few pieces that were more sentimental than valuable. I remember this ornate gold locket that Mom used to say carried her grandmother's spirit. Mom wore it on special occasions or when she needed extra strength. There was a ruby ring that belonged to her mother, polished so often it shone brilliantly in the light. Mom also had a pair of pearl earrings she wore to celebrate every significant milestone in our family, from birthdays to graduations. I cherished these items because they represented her presence, even if she was no longer physically with us. They had been in our family for generations, each piece carrying stories of resilience and love. As I mourned, I kept those pieces of jewelry tucked away, waiting for the day I'd feel strong enough to wear them in her memory. Dad remarried surprisingly quickly a year later. His new wife was kind, but Kaylee clashed with her at every turn. Kaylee insisted she couldn't live under the same roof and moved in with me while I was still in college. I had a tiny apartment near campus, paid for with scholarships and part-time work. I had no room for drama, but she was my sister, and I was determined to keep the family together in the only way I knew. Kaylee's tantrums grew worse. She'd max out my credit card on online shopping, then act shocked when I showed her the bills. She was manipulative and cunning, but I believed she needed stability, so I kept giving her second chances. When she turned 18, Kaylee decided college wasn't for her. She jumped from one job to another, always quitting for the pettiest reasons. She'd say something like, "They asked me to work late once, I'm not a slave," or "The manager looked at me the wrong way." Each time she quit, she expected me to cover her rent and food. I did it because I felt guilty about her upbringing. Maybe I was trying to fill the void left by Mom. I always remembered how Mom would try to shield us from hardships, so I tried to do the same for my sister. I knew it wasn't sustainable, but I couldn't turn my back on her, especially after we'd lost so much. The jewelry stayed in a locked box in my closet, inside a storage container, with the hope that one day I'd pass it down in a meaningful way. Kaylee never showed any interest beyond giving it a quick glance when she found me looking at it one day. She scoffed and said, "Those pieces look old-fashioned. I'd never wear them." I shrugged and told her they weren't about fashion. They were about family history. She rolled her eyes. I remember feeling a sting, but I wrote it off, thinking maybe one day she'd understand. Eventually, Dad's health began to decline, unrelated to his depression. He faced issues with his heart, which forced him into early retirement. I'd scrape together money to help him and my stepmother, while Kaylee insisted on living rent-free with me. By then, I had a stable job, not a high-paying one, but enough to keep the lights on. Kaylee never contributed more than minimal effort. She sometimes brought groceries, then complained it was too expensive. She'd shrug off any talk about finding steady employment, claiming nobody understood her. Yet, every few weeks, I'd see a new designer bag or fancy electronic gadget mysteriously appear in her room. I'd ask where she got the money, and she'd smirk, deflecting the question. Something felt off, but I never pressed too hard. Part of me still hoped she'd eventually mature. A few months ago, our grandmother turned 80. She's the last grandparent we have, and she's as tough as nails. She lives in a small seniors community, funded partly by her pension and partly by Dad's contributions before he retired. She's thrifty and always taught us the value of saving every penny. I decided to throw her a small surprise party with close family. Kaylee volunteered to handle the cake and decorations. That surprised me, considering her track record. I let her do it, thinking maybe she was finally stepping up to the plate. The day of the party arrived, and everything went smoothly at first. Grandma was overjoyed we'd all gathered to celebrate, and Kaylee was oddly enthusiastic, fluttering around with a camera in hand. Then, the moment for gifts came. I gave Grandma a framed photo of her and Mom, something I knew would touch her heart. Everyone else gave small but thoughtful gifts, like a soft blanket or a basket of her favorite snacks. Kaylee stood up last. She made a dramatic show of presenting a velvet box. Grandma opened it to find a dazzling gold locket, ruby ring, and pearl earrings. My heart stopped. Those were Mom's pieces, no mistake. I instantly recognized the intricate design on the locket, the exact shade of the ruby's gleam, and the familiar pearls. My first reaction was confusion. How had Kaylee gotten them? Then rage flooded me as realization struck. These were stolen from my closet. I locked eyes with Kaylee, who flashed me a smug grin, as if daring me to speak up in front of Grandma. I felt my body go numb. Grandma gasped and thanked Kaylee repeatedly, tears in her eyes as she praised her generosity. Kaylee basked in the attention. Meanwhile, I struggled not to burst out yelling. I forced a smile and tried to keep my composure for Grandma's sake. This was her special day, and the last thing I wanted was to ruin it with a public showdown. But inside, I was boiling. I barely made it through the rest of the party, going through the motions, silently fuming. As soon as I could politely excuse myself, I went home. I marched straight to my closet and saw that my locked storage box had been pried open. The cheap metal lock was broken. The jewelry was gone, replaced by a wad of tissue paper. My hands shook. That was all I had left of Mom, and Kaylee had just handed it over like a party favor. I confronted Kaylee that night, demanding an explanation. She laughed, telling me Grandma deserved something nice for once. I asked how she dared to steal from me and from Mom's legacy. She rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, at least it's still in the family." I told her to get it back and return it to me. She refused, retorting that Grandma was thrilled and I should be ashamed for wanting to take away Grandma's birthday gift. She slammed her bedroom door, leaving me dumbfounded. I spent the night pacing in the living room, feeling betrayed and unsure of my next move. How could my own sister do this? Kaylee's words played on repeat in my head, each one laced with the venom of entitlement. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The next morning, when I tried to bring it up again, she dodged me and sped out the door. I was at a loss. Grandma loved those pieces now, and ripping them back from her felt wrong. She had no idea they were stolen from me. Kaylee had done it in such a way that I would look like the bad guy if I tried to take them back. Then, life threw another curveball. While organizing some bills, I stumbled across a suspicious bank statement in Kaylee's name left on the kitchen counter in a messy pile of receipts. I saw a recent deposit of $10,000. My heart lurched. There was no legitimate reason Kaylee would have that much money, not unless she'd come into an inheritance or a massive salary, both of which were impossible. I dug deeper. The deposit came from a jewelry store. Kaylee had sold Mom's jewelry, or at least part of it, for $10,000. She must have replaced the real pieces with high-quality replicas before gifting them to Grandma. That explained the overly shiny look of the locket, though at first glance, it was almost identical. I couldn't believe the lengths she'd gone to, all to pocket a large sum of money under the guise of generosity. I felt physically ill, imagining her strutting around with thousands of dollars while our grandmother proudly wore cheap knockoffs. Worse still, Kaylee had the nerve to play it off like she was some doting granddaughter. It was beyond cruel. I wanted to confront her right away, but I needed proof. I visited the jewelry store listed on the statement, pretending to be a concerned family member. I told the jeweler my sister might have sold a family heirloom without permission and asked if there was any record. The jeweler hesitated, citing privacy concerns, but I showed him the statement with his store's name on it, tears brimming in my eyes as I explained it was all I had left of my late mother. He finally nodded in sympathy. He confirmed Kaylee had sold multiple items, listing a gold locket, a ruby ring, and pearl earrings. The total payout was indeed $10,000. My hands clenched into fists as I thanked him for his help. I walked out of the store trembling from anger. That night, I waited for Kaylee to come home. She arrived late, wearing new clothes and carrying a shopping bag from an upscale boutique. My chest tightened at the sight. I asked her calmly if she'd sold Mom's jewelry. She didn't bother lying. She shrugged and said she needed money, and those pieces were wasted sitting in my closet. She argued that I had a good job and I shouldn't care, since it wasn't like I was going to wear them daily. I saw red. I reminded her those pieces had sentimental value. She snapped back, "Sentiment doesn't pay rent." That was rich coming from someone who never paid rent. When I demanded she return the money, she told me she didn't have it anymore. She claimed she spent it on bills and improving her life. I asked what bills, and she rattled off vague excuses. I knew she was lying, probably spending the bulk of it on herself. I told her to move out. She scoffed, said she had no place to go, reminded me I was the big sister who was supposed to protect her. That line used to work on me, tugging at my guilt. But not this time. I told her I was done, that she had 1 week to pack her things. She tried tears, accusations, calling me heartless. I stood firm. She stormed into her room and slammed the door so hard it rattled the frame. I felt a twinge of sadness. This was the same kid I'd once read bedtime stories to, but she'd crossed a line that I couldn't overlook. After she left that night to go who knows where, I sat on the couch, thinking about how I could make things right. Grandma was happily wearing imitation jewelry, believing it was real. Kaylee had $10,000 from selling Mom's legacy. And I was left with shattered trust. I knew confronting Grandma would only break her heart, but I couldn't let Kaylee walk away unscathed. She needed a lesson that would ensure she never tried something like this again. It had to be more than just kicking her out. She had to feel consequences. I considered calling the police, but turning in my own sister was a heavy decision. On the other hand, she'd clearly stolen from me. Maybe that was the only real option. Before I took that step, I decided to talk to Dad and see if he could intervene. He was shocked, and at first, he refused to believe Kaylee would do something so cruel. But when I showed him the proof, he was speechless. He admitted he had no control over Kaylee's actions since she cut him off a while ago. His health was fragile, and I didn't want to add more stress to his plate. Nonetheless, he said he understood if I had to involve the authorities. He urged me to think carefully, so I did. I contacted a lawyer friend for advice. He said I had a solid case if I could prove ownership of the jewelry, but realistically, the process might take time. He also mentioned small claims court as a possibility if I just wanted the money back. I asked if criminal charges were feasible, and he said it was technically theft, but families often settle these matters privately. I was torn between wanting my money and Mom's memory restored and not wanting to see Kaylee end up behind bars. But every time I recalled the smug look on her face, my resolve hardened. She had shown no remorse. She even mocked me as though I was the one overreacting. I decided to do some digging. I found out Kaylee was bragging to her friends online about buying a fancy car. Sure enough, she posted pictures on social media. The caption read, "Finally got my dream ride. Hard work pays off." Hard work, my foot. My blood boiled. She was parading around in a vehicle funded by Mom's jewelry. That sealed it. I was going to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. I contacted the police non-emergency line and explained the situation, clarifying this was about stolen property. They took my statement, and I gave them all the evidence. Photos of the jewelry, the store receipt, and proof it was part of Mom's estate. They said they would investigate, but also advised me to file a civil claim if I wanted compensation. I made sure Kaylee didn't see it coming. She had no idea I was speaking with the authorities. Meanwhile, I didn't tell Grandma or anyone else about the fake jewelry. I didn't want her hurt by the news that Kaylee's grand gesture was a scam. My lawyer friend helped me draft a letter demanding the return of the stolen money or face legal consequences. I mailed it to Kaylee's new address where she'd moved in with a friend after I kicked her out. She responded with a barrage of text messages threatening to claim I was lying. She said she'd tell people I forced her to sell it. It was pathetic, but I saved every message as further proof. When the police visited her, she panicked. She tried to twist the story, telling them I had agreed to let her sell the jewelry. Thankfully, the jeweler's statement contradicted her. He clearly recalled that she mentioned inheriting the pieces. It was documented that she did not share ownership with anyone else. Kaylee scrambled, insisting there was a misunderstanding. The officers informed her they might have enough to charge her. She quickly offered to give me back whatever she could, but she'd spent most of the money and the items were long gone. The store had already sold the locket, ring, and earrings to a private buyer. For a moment, I felt a pang of loss, knowing Mom's cherished pieces might never return. Kaylee ended up in a situation where the law wasn't exactly on her side. She was forced to pay restitution, a portion of the money each month, until the $10,000 was fully repaid. I knew it could take years, but at least she was legally bound to do it. That wasn't enough for me. I wanted her to learn that not everything revolved around her selfish wants. Our grandmother still believed Kaylee had gifted her genuine jewelry. I considered telling Grandma the truth, but she'd been so happy and proud of Kaylee. I felt an obligation to protect her from the heartbreak. However, I also felt she deserved to know what happened to her daughter's keepsakes. I decided on a more delicate approach. A month after Kaylee's fiasco with the police, I invited Grandma over for lunch. I sat her down and told her gently that the jewelry she wore wasn't the original set Mom had left. She looked confused, so I explained that Kaylee had replaced them with replicas, selling the originals for money. Grandma's eyes welled with tears. She clutched the locket, trembling, and asked why Kaylee would do such a horrible thing. I hugged her and apologized for letting it happen. She cried, mourning the real pieces in Mom's memory, but I assured her we had taken legal steps to ensure Kaylee was held accountable. Grandma quietly removed the fake locket and placed it on the table, saying it no longer held any meaning for her. It pained me to see her so hurt, yet she thanked me for being honest. Word got around the family. They were horrified and disgusted. Kaylee tried to spin the story, claiming she only sold the jewelry to pay for medical bills for Dad, but everyone knew that was a lie. Dad himself refuted it. Extended relatives who once bailed Kaylee out of financial trouble cut her off completely. She became a pariah, forced to sell her new car to meet the restitution payments. She'd call me late at night, crying and begging me to drop the charges. I refused. She threatened again, then pleaded, but I stood my ground. I was done being her doormat, done letting her disrespect Mom's memory. She ended up losing her apartment because she couldn't afford rent without the stolen money. I heard she couch surfed with acquaintances, but nobody would host her for long. Each time, her manipulative ways surfaced, and they kicked her out. Part of me felt a sting of guilt, remembering she was my sister, but the rage and betrayal were stronger. She had stolen one of the last tangible connections I had to Mom. If she had come to me, tears in her eyes, regretful, truly apologizing, maybe I would have softened. But she had shown no remorse until legal action cornered her. Even then, her apologies were half-baked, more about saving her own skin than making amends. I poured that bitterness into a plan to reclaim some symbolic justice. I decided to host a small family gathering on Mom's birthday, a chance to remember her and pay tribute. I reached out to that jeweler, asking if he could help me locate the buyer of the original pieces. He said he'd try. To my surprise, the buyer was an elderly collector who specialized in antique family heirlooms. When I contacted him, he was sympathetic and agreed to sell them back to me for the same price he'd paid the store, plus a small premium for his trouble. It was a stretch for me financially, but I dipped into my savings. This was my mother's legacy, and I couldn't put a price on that. On the day of the gathering, I unveiled the recovered jewelry in front of everyone, including Grandma and Dad. Grandma wept openly, touching each piece like it was a miracle. She asked how I managed it, and I explained, without revealing the buyer's identity, that I'd tracked them down. Dad embraced me, apologizing for not protecting Mom's memory. Kaylee was conspicuously absent. She had been pointedly not invited. While we were sitting there, admiring the pieces, Kaylee showed up unannounced, apparently hearing from someone that we were all together. She walked into the living room, eyes wide at the sight of the jewelry. She made a beeline toward it, stammering something about how this was all a misunderstanding and how she'd planned to buy it back herself. Nobody believed her. She reached out as if to touch the locket, but I stepped between her and the table. I told her calmly she had no right to be here. She said, "I'm Mom's daughter too. I deserve to at least see them." I told her she gave up that privilege the moment she sold them. She started to cry, looking around for sympathy, but nobody budged. Grandma looked at her with an expression I'd never seen, complete disappointment. Dad just shook his head. Kaylee pleaded with me to end her legal woes, to accept an apology. I told her I'd never forgive what she did and that she needed to leave. She threatened to scream if we threw her out. I simply opened the door and motioned for her to go. After a tense moment, she stormed out. That was the last time I saw her face to face. In the months that followed, Kaylee's life spiraled. She tried to get back on her feet, but the theft charge remained on her record, and she struggled to keep any job. She badmouthed me on social media, painting me as a cruel sibling who valued money over family. But the rest of the family knew the truth. They knew how many years I supported her, how many sacrifices I made in the name of family. Her words fell on deaf ears. With time, she faded from our circles. I heard rumors she moved to another city. I took no pleasure in her misery, but I felt relief that she was out of our lives, or at least out of reach to cause more damage. As for Grandma, she never again wore the fake jewelry. Instead, she asked me to keep the original pieces safe. She said she didn't trust herself not to dwell on how Kaylee had shattered her illusions. Now, each year on Mom's birthday, we take out the jewelry and remember the strong, loving woman who bound our family together. It's a bittersweet ritual. Sometimes I wonder if Kaylee ever understood the gravity of her actions. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been gentler or harsher. But then I recall the coldness in her eyes when she told me sentiment doesn't pay rent. And I remember the smug grin at Grandma's party. That extinguishes any lingering pity I might have. She made her choices. I refuse to forgive her. This isn't one of those heartwarming posts where everything ends in a group hug. My sister betrayed me, and she never showed genuine remorse. She tried to spin her theft as an act of generosity while pocketing $10,000 and giving my grandmother cheap replicas that symbolized nothing but greed. I pursued the legal route because it was the only way to ensure she faced real consequences. She lost her fancy car, her apartment, her reputation, and her family's trust. Now, she'll be paying me back for years to come. I'd call that justice. I kept supporting her out of a deep-rooted sense of family duty, hoping she'd eventually become the person Mom believed she could be. But some people don't change until they hit rock bottom. Even then, change is never guaranteed. I did what I had to do. If that makes me the villain in her eyes, so be it. I sleep soundly knowing I protected Mom's legacy, kept Grandma from living with a lie, and taught Kaylee a lesson she won't soon forget. Maybe one day she'll realize what she lost, but that's no longer my concern. Mom's jewelry is back where it belongs, and I've severed the toxic tie that was strangling me for too long. That is all the closure I need. I'm sharing this now because I know what it's like to feel guilty about not forgiving family, and I want others to understand it's okay to draw a line. Forgiveness isn't mandatory when someone crosses a boundary so flagrantly, especially if they show no remorse. Kaylee wanted to exploit my soft spot for her, but I've learned I can still care about family values without letting myself be victimized. I've chosen to honor my mother's memory by standing up for what's right, even when it's painful. There's a certain peace in refusing to let a betrayer keep hurting you. And if anyone reading this faces a similar dilemma, know that self-preservation isn't selfish. I look back and see a tragedy of two siblings who could have been close but ended up as strangers. It hurts. Yet I also accept that not everyone is meant to remain in your life, even if you share blood. I won't lie. Some nights I dream that she regrets it all and apologizes sincerely, that we rebuild our bond. But then I wake up, remember the reality, and realize I'm better off without her. Betrayal doesn't vanish with time. Sometimes the best you can do is ensure it doesn't repeat. My advice to anyone reading this is to trust your gut. If someone repeatedly shows you who they are, believe them. Don't wait for another heartbreak to confirm what you already suspect. I gave Kaylee countless chances because I was stuck in the mindset that family should be unconditional. But unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of abuse or manipulation. Love also means respecting boundaries, safeguarding cherished memories, and refusing to let a toxic person destroy them. I still feel a pang whenever I see the locket, ring, and earrings, remembering how close they came to being lost forever. Sometimes I wish Mom were here to tell me she's proud of how I handled things. She always believed in forgiveness and compassion, but she also never tolerated anyone disrespecting her family's legacy. I think deep down, she'd understand why I had to seek vengeance rather than forgiveness. Because what Kaylee did wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate betrayal. A betrayal of Mom's memory, Grandma's trust, and my kindness. And that, in my book, is unforgivable. I won't pretend everything is perfect now. Dad's health is still up and down, and my finances took a hit from buying back the jewelry. But I no longer have to live under the same roof with someone who'd steal from me in a heartbeat. I'm free from the guilt of constantly wondering if I should do more for Kaylee. I did plenty, and she spat on it. She can live with the consequences of her actions, and I'll live with the solace of having stood up for Mom's memory. Grandma still calls me sometimes and asks how we're all doing. I can't lie to her and say Kaylee turned over a new leaf. She knows the truth. But we make sure our smaller family gatherings remain filled with genuine love and remembrance, not deceit. We share stories of Mom, sometimes laughing until tears come, sometimes crying until we're spent. It's raw and real. Everything Kaylee's gift was not. The last time I heard from Kaylee, she sent a text that read, "I hate you for ruining my life." I never replied. She ruined her own life. I just refused to be collateral damage. She chose greed over family, so she lost both. I've made my peace with that, and if she ever tries to come near Mom's jewelry again, I have no doubt the law will have something to say about it. This is my revenge, and it feels justified. I don't need her apology or her guilt. I have what matters, the tangible reminder of who Mom was and the integrity to protect it. Kaylee can keep her bitterness. I'm done wasting energy on her sob stories. That's all I wanted to say. This might not be the wrap-up some people hope for, where everyone reconciles under a rainbow of forgiveness. Real life isn't always like that. Sometimes the best ending is simply finding the strength to protect what you love and cutting off the people who only bring you pain. In my case, I got back what Kaylee took, and I'm making her pay every cent she owes. Maybe that's not pretty, but it's fair. And for once, Kaylee doesn't get to dance away from the consequences of her selfishness. That's how this story ends. With me keeping my mother's legacy intact, Grandma finally aware of the truth, and Kaylee paying the price for her betrayal. I have no regrets. If she ever wonders why I won't forgive her, I hope she remembers the day she sold our mother's jewelry for 10,000 pieces of silver, because that's the day she lost me for good. And I don't think I'll ever look back.